right. This is Featured Teachers. I'm your host, Jason Levine, better known as Fluency MC. I am here representing American TESOL Institute. Big shout out to this great organization that makes these Featured Teachers webinars possible. I'm really happy to introduce to you, although you may know this guy already, someone I've worked with now for many, many years, collaborated, a friend in social media, a colleague in English language teaching, a really cool person who does amazing things in English language teaching. That's why he's a featured teacher. That's why he's here. It is Story Paul, and we're going to be talking about the power of storytelling for non-native English speakers. My friend and colleague, Story Paul, welcome to Features Teacher.
All right, thanks so much, Jace.
Tell us a little bit about who is Story Paul? Who is Story Paul?
All right, who is Story Paul?
Yeah.
All right, let's do that. Okay, thanks once again, Jace. Really a pleasure to be here with everyone.
Great to have you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much. Basically, a little bit about myself. So my background is not in TESOL. Originally, I did get a certification later on, but I started in the video broadcast film production arena. I got a degree in audiovisual production. I was, this is something I never told anyone, but originally my original plan was to be an engineer. But that didn't really go very well because like the math and some of those subjects didn't go well. So I wanted to meet, yeah, it was just not for me, not my cup of tea. So I went into media production, and I worked for years in mainly in television, and from there I got into educational production. I did stuff around the Americas, but in Argentina, because that's where I am currently living, and it was really exciting for a while. But then one thing led to another, and as I got to be a kind of an educational content producer, I started, getting in touch with the world of ESL and English communication. And I started working kind of in business, teaching business classes, or business English, I should say, because I had, as a producer, I had an idea of what the business world was like. I was a producer for Endemol, which was actually, or is, probably still is, I'm sure they exist, a Dutch production company doing all of these reality type shows, which I'm not really a big fan of, but that's where I got, my production start. And so I was working a lot as a producer, which is kind of like working as a manager. You have to, get stuff done. So I thought I had a lot to share with business students about, how to use English in communication for business. But I realized that most of the material that is put out by the publishing companies is oriented towards grammar, vocabulary building. There are some units in the business English books that, will have how to do a presentation, using sequencers, and transitions and a couple of things, but there's business grammar. So really it's just kind of a reformulation of basically what the non-business English learners get to see, but with, added words from the marketing and accounting and all that kind of world.
So what did you, seeing that and realizing, and when you're telling me about it, I'm like, wow, there's some problems there.
I realized that it actually wasn't my fault. It was actually a student who his name was Gustavo, and he's the one that got me into the storytelling. He had to do a presentation, and he was an IT guy. I mean, he's probably still in the IT world. Maybe he retired, but I think he probably still is there. And he asked me to help him with the presentation. So since I was kind of new in ESL, I just helped him with the English grammar part of it. And, he was like, no, I need your help from your other expertise, your other bag of tricks. I'm like, what, like TV production? Well, not exactly storytelling. This was 2008 or so, when TED Talks were not so famous. So
how did he know you had this skill in storytelling? That's really important.
Because exactly, sorry, I went a little bit too fast.
No, it's okay. It's just
he connected the fact that I had worked in, television production, and connected that world with storytelling. He said, okay, you come from that arena, from the world of media and production. So you know how to tell stories. You come from that background. You've written scripts.
And when he said that to you, were you like, oh yeah, of course? Or had you not made that connection the same way?
I hadn't made the connection. I thought that it was like, don't bring that into this, so fast, because here we're here to teach adjectives and pronouns and, phrasal verbs and all that stuff. And he says, no, I want you to teach me how to tell a story because I want to do like a TED Talk, and TED Talks were not so famous back in 2008. They had been around a few years before. Ken Robinson's first TED Talk was in 2006, which is still one of my favorite talks, about how schools kill creativity.
I remember.
If you haven't watched it, it's worth, the late, great Ken Robinson, may he rest in peace, great guy.
So what was your reaction? Were you like, oh yeah, of course, that's something?
I didn't know what to do. I said, let me organize myself, because I need to prepare things for you. And, and so he said, okay, he had to do a presentation a few months, and he had to travel. He was working for one of these international, multinational companies, and he had to do a presentation on something really great that his team had done. They had solved this really complex issue. And he said, look, I don't want to explain this with graphics and charts. I want to tell a story. And so I had to dig into my knowledge, and I kind of came up with, a way of organizing that so that it was not so, in the language of TV writers, with all this difficult language about storytelling from the writing and literature point of view, but something more accessible to someone in business. So I kind of created, using Photoshop and other tools, I kind of created like cards, almost like poker cards, where they were easy to remember. So there was, how to organize a story was 3 cards called the focus, where you had, the first part, the second part, and the third part of the story, Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Every story, it doesn't matter if it's, Grimm Brothers or Walt Disney or some indie film, it doesn't matter. They all have those 3 parts, right? And in the first part, everything's cool. It's business as usual. And then something happens and everything's not cool. There's a conflict. And most of the second part, or the second act, is about how you deal with that conflict. And then the third part is just how that conflict is resolved. I mean, that's what a story is.
Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. I'm going to stop you here. Just I want to understand. Yeah. So at this point, what you're talking about now is, okay, this is how a story works, whether it's a story for a young child, whether it's a story for someone in a movie, a novel. But what were you thinking? Were you thinking that this makes sense? Like, people go to job interviews, people try to do things in business with this kind of boring presentation approach, or just too much thinking about learning English, like you said, like these idioms, this grammar, or were you figuring out for yourself this approach? Like, did it happen at once, or was it something you were trying to?
It didn't happen at once. With Gustavo, I kind of organized myself. So I still didn't have the idea clear in my mind. I basically taught him how to tell a story as if he was a writer. Really, it wasn't that different. The only thing where I maybe helped him on was the delivery part, where, and this is where I want to take it back to ESL, so that we, it's not only about storytelling, but it's also about how this connects. What really happens in ESL, which is my field now, is we generally teach our learners and the non-native English, speakers, come from that background, from that training, from that school. We teach people how to write, not how to speak. And, there's a very kind of static feeling to narrative when it comes from writing. It's basically sentences that give you information. You can deliver information. You can, answer questions about your vacation if you're a teenager in an ESL class, or you could talk to somebody in an interview if you're an adult. But if you're speaking like you write, you're just going to be making these dry sentences, maybe with some forced adjectives that you kind of memorized. But you're not telling a story. So storytelling has to do with interacting with your audience, especially oral storytelling, which is basically what stand-up comedians do, what some natural storytellers do, even in the business world. A guy like Steve Jobs, the guy was a natural storyteller. He could get on stage And he would, of course, he'd be, he was shilling the latest iPad, iPhone, whatever. He was selling that to you, but he did it with a cool story.
Can I break in here? Because one thing that I do with not just storytelling, but any type of kind of expressing, students expressing themselves through speaking, like in this conversation, I do a lot with having them write things down first, not because writing it down is something that they're going to just read. On the contrary, that they're able, if they write it, we can look at some of the mistakes they might make, get them comfortable with it. So then it's kind of just notes that they're using to then communicate a story or communicate something in speaking. Does that jibe with what you're talking about?
It totally jives, because writing is the first part. But what we learn is we learn how to write. We actually have to go through certain stages. First, we got the theory of what a story is. It's a tool. It helps to, describe a process of change, a journey that someone goes through. Okay, once he understood that, and once that's clear what our goal is, to take someone on that journey with us of what we went through with conflict and emphasizing that, we have to put it down on paper. So that the second stage is to do kind of like what I call the kind of put down on paper, or the core message. I said, okay, you got to get your core message. It's not a story yet. What message do you want to deliver? Are you talking about yourself in an interview? Are you describing a project? Are you talking about, for the IELTS, what you did on a vacation, whatever it might be? It doesn't really matter, because it's applicable for any age, any walk of life. You do have to get it down on paper. But once you get it down on paper, and you can get it down on paper using standard sentence structure, subject, verb, object, that's fine. You could even use transitions of contrast, of addition, however, nevertheless, that's all good.
But you're not going to be memorizing that.
But that's not the final form.
You're going to use that.
Still, it's not the final form. That's just like an intermediate stage, so you can put your ideas on paper, and that helps. And that also helps us as teachers, coaches, mentors, tutors, to kind of see where they need some work with grammar. Like if someone's missing the third person conjugation of the verbs, you're going to see that on paper. It's going to like stand out and slap you on the face. So you definitely, that's a good stage to do. Once you kind of got that part, or somebody that's missing an article, or using the wrong one, or just simply using good for everything, putting everything in terms of good and bad. Okay, help them out with some adjectives, make it a little bit more colorful.
Right.
That's very useful to put it on the page. But then we get into the final part, which is the delivery part, which is what I call the story lingo, right? So there's a difference between, describing. I always use the example of a job interview. The person that's, describing a job experience they had. And so maybe they say, okay, I started working at ABC company 3 years ago, and I was, this, and I was that, to adding a little bit of, kind of tell it like a story. So there I was, first day on the job, couldn't believe it, right? When we tell stories, we use a lot of short phrases, short language. We repeat a lot of stuff, right? Couldn't believe it, really bad. This was, whatever, a reaction, if I'm describing a situation, a conflict.
And because that's natural, that's what the person listening is expecting. And it's subconscious, right? Like
it is subconscious.
If that's what you do, then that person feels at ease, because that's what they expect. That's what they've, seen in other situations, whether it's a job interview, whether it's the IELTS, like you said, all these different. So it's about helping students get into that mode, right?
It's about getting into that mode. And that mode is often, it's funny because it looks a lot like it kind of looks more like text messaging or putting bullets. It's kind of a very fragmented thing. As long as you stay, on message, you don't go off into a tangent and, change from topic A to topic B for no reason. But if you're talking about the same topic and you're trying to get into depth and give details, you have to, give details, but not making a full, complete, complex sentence for each detail, because that's where it gets boring for a listener, when you sound like you're writing an essay for your 5th grade teacher, right? And some people memorize that stuff for interviews or for presentation or when they're delivering slides, and it's the cure for insomnia. It puts everybody to sleep.
What would you say if somebody said, yeah, I know, but my English level is not good enough to do this, what you're talking about, to just kind of, improvise, maybe take this fragment. I'm at a level, or whether maybe it's a teacher watching this thinking like, what you're saying is great, but maybe, I'm not Story Paul. I'm not going to give that one-to-one attention to this person who's going to have an interview next week. Like, what can teachers do? I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead, and we can talk about.
No, you're not jumping ahead. I think a lot of what we can do if we're limited on budget and we can't, have a coach us personally, like this guy Gustavo did, who had me, check every phrase and teach him about dramatics and about making pauses and all that, is we can do what we do as kids when we're learning. We study others, and we have plenty of good examples. So studying others means finding someone you like. Today, thanks to technology and YouTube and TED Talks and all this tutorials and whatnot, we have all these great resources and a lot of the wonderful, ESL community people making wonderful videos out there like yourself. We have examples to take from. So don't only look at how, when people speak, especially when they're delivering a message about something or telling a story or an experience, don't only look at the grammar of it. If they're using the past or the present or present perfect, look at the difference of how this would sound. Think of it, if this was an essay, it would sound very different than when they're delivering, right? TED Talks are the perfect example of that. They're like the most complete example, because TED Talk speakers, and they are coached, right? Most of them anyway, except for the naturals, they do this all the time. They have a message, but they deliver it in the form of a story with fragments. And so you look at the grammar of that, or you look at the writing, the syntax of that. You have the transcript. You could print it out, study it, okay, and look at how it works. And you'll see this in action. You'll see that in most cases, speaking to that imaginary student that we were just saying, that was asking about how difficult this was. It's actually a lot less complex, the grammar used by someone delivering a story, than someone maybe giving a dissertation at a university or writing a complex essay or term paper. People generally in these kind of TED Talk scenarios actually speak in short sentences with fragments, using common, short, no more than 2-3 syllable words.
That's absolutely
because
correct,
it's the language that we use.
Absolutely. But what would you say if I said to you, okay, I've had students, learners, speakers, as you said when we talked the other day. I love that, speakers.
Yeah, speakers.
Who are at a level where they haven't really gotten the questions order with do. So they might not say, do you think that this is a good idea? They might say, you think, right? And then they're in a TED Talk and they're noticing these fragments. And so they're doing the fragment thing because that's how we feel comfortable. But then they have an email or they're in a job interview and someone says, do you have any questions? And instead of saying, do you offer, medical benefits? They say, you offer medical benefits? I'm just wondering because I'm not talking about in a prescriptive way, like, oh, we shouldn't use fragments. I'm like, totally in conversation, we're doing that. On the other hand, it's not easy, right? For someone at maybe an intermediate level, if they haven't fully grasped things like, the do auxiliary, the word order, and then they're also watching TED Talks and getting the fragments. How do you balance that?
How do you balance that? Well, first of all, there's two things. I think, there's probably a lot of teachers here in our audience. So I think that this is something that's accessible to someone who has like an intermediate level and up. I think a student that might be lower intermediate or upper elementary, they're gonna struggle with it because they're still struggling with a lot of the structural issues. So it is. Wait a little bit on this and you can come back to it later. Because it is kind of challenging from the language syntax perspective, the grammar perspective. Now, another question, another answer to your question is, when do you use storytelling? You don't need to use it all the time, right? There is a time if you're, negotiating your benefits for a salary, in a job interview, you might just want to ask in standard English. you might want to ask a standard English question.
But that's a great
you
point.
know,
That is to me the best possible answer, because it's also, I think, if you're going to really develop the storytelling skills, you need to look at it, right, as a separate kind of thing. Like, you know, whereas native speakers who are, and not just native speakers, that's not really the point. It's more like native speakers or advanced speakers with a lot of storytelling experience, right?
Yes.
Whether it's firsthand, you know, however it happened, we can sort of go without being conscious of it from, right, some sort of formal type of interchange into a storytelling thing and back, right? So like we're moving around in terms of register. So I think that's really important, because if you got someone who is a lower level English learner or speaker, like, you know, you want to talk about the storytelling as this sort of function, right? You're in this.
Yeah, it's a tool.
It's a tool. You're telling a story, and when you go into that mode, as you said, you can shadow people. You find someone in a TED Talk, someone, you know, you develop a style. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. What I call it, you know, your language parent or your language model. I tell my students, find somebody you like. I don't care who it is. And it doesn't have to be a native English speaker. Let's come back to that. If you like, you know, Malala Yousafzai and how she speaks, she's a wonderful speaker. She's a natural. I mean, she's an amazing storyteller. And she's not obviously a native English speaker. She's Pakistani, and she's an amazing English speaker in the sense of her delivery. She uses, you know, pacing and dynamics, and you know, she'll go back and forth and use the fragments. So it's about finding someone you like. You know, I know that we had a chat the other day. We were talking about, you know, this thing of, and coming back, native, non-native, and it's part of our title here. This is, you know, today it doesn't matter. You know, we have 2 billion non-native English speakers in the world. This thing of aspiring to speak like an American, like a British, like an Aussie. If you need that because you're, you know, it's part of your job, you're working in a job where you require that, or that's required of you, or you like it aspirationally, that's perfect. But that is not, you know, what is most important. What most important is that you connect with others. And if you have an accent, that's not a big deal.
And sorry to jump in, but isn't, you know, storytelling universal in the sense that it doesn't mean that there aren't techniques or approaches or things that are different. It's like music, right? I mean, it's universal. So it's just, you know, there may be some differences that you know, may not be used to or whatever, but like you said, like, you know, we hear a story from Malala, or we hear a story from, you know, someone in China or Mexico, and there might be a little different, but but usually, right, there's something we connect with as a human beings.
Yeah, we connect with as human beings. I mean, stories have been around for, you know, thousands of years. It's probably the first thing we were writing on the walls when we were living in caves. We were telling each other stories with pictures. Eventually we figured out how to make different sounds that had different meanings, but before we did that, we were painting the pictures.
That's right.
So it's part of our psyche. It's embedded in our structure. It doesn't matter what we eat, what we dress, what we speak, what we believe in, what we dance to. You know, that's what makes us individual. But that's, you know, the story was before all that stuff.
Okay, so let's get to some concrete stuff here. So like let's start with the job interview, and let's maybe move back, because I know that we have some teachers here, and thank you for coming live. If you're here, there are going to be many more people watching the recording. Someone just asked if we will have a recording. Yes, we will. Let's start with what it seems like you're doing now, which is you're doing some coaching for people in business, how they can use a story in an interview. I mean, I know as someone who's interviewed a lot of people in my life, I'd much rather hear somebody respond in an interesting kind of story way, not something that's, you know, you know, too off the topic. That might be a little bizarre, but that isn't just answering and kind of like, this is, you know, my experience, this is what I've done. So what are you doing with your speakers, your learners? I know you're teaching, you're working with people from all around the world now. What are you doing with storytelling for somebody in business? Let's start with the business adult. How are you coaching them to use this?
The first thing that I do with them is I ask them what their communication, you know, is about, what they need to communicate with about, and with whom. So one thing is, who's their audience? who do they need to talk to? Do they have customers? Do they have internal customers? Like they have to talk to a board of directors? Are they, sales reps that they have to talk to customers? Are they IT people that they have to talk to non-IT people about, some web development? So you have to define your audience.
Okay.
Once you define your audience, so number one, define who's your audience, right? And once you define your audience, what's your message? What do you usually talk about? If you're, in a software development world, you're generally, have a project that you're working on. So you might have to really just talk to your boss or your team leader about how progress is going. So basically your audience, or, the person that you have to talk to, is someone who knows about that. But if you're the guy or the gal that has to explain the product to the marketing people who don't know a thing about, technology, or who don't know that much from the inside, the coding part of it, you have to explain it in non-tech terms. So the important thing is to define your audience and then define your message, right? And once we, define the audience, we start doing what I call I-Core. I-Core is like a 5-part or 5-point message. So, you have like different types of messages. Look, I have to describe a product. So, maybe if you're applying for a job, you don't know what products you're going to have, but you know a product that you designed in the past, even if it was just a project for university. All right, describe that one. Okay, describe it to me. So they said, well, I don't know. How do I do that? Right. So it's a 5-point description of something, a 5-point message. So the first part of the message is introduce the message. Okay, using very simple things like, hey, I'm going to tell you about this, or let's talk about this, or let me explain to you what I did, or let me explain how this works, right? In other words, you have to start there. It might sound obvious, but one of the things that I discover when I'm working with business students, especially today in this world that everyone's participating in Zoom calls, is that people, when they talk to each other in teams, they start with a very specific detail of whatever they're talking about. If they're discussing a problem, a solution, how sales went last month, they don't first introduce what they're talking about. And so the reality is, because they assume that everyone knows, that everyone's living inside their brain and they know, because we're all busy and we have 1,000 things to do. And it's even worse with the pandemic because, we have the baby at home. I got that. But still, when you have somebody in front of you, you got to first tell you, okay, I'm going to give you a report of our last quarterly earnings. I mean, start there. That might seem obvious, but most people don't do that. So I show them how to introduce that subject. Then, what is your core message? What sales go up, did sales go down? If we're describing a product. What is this product? Hey, this is a tool to edit photos. Okay, it's a tool to edit photos. That's it. That's what it is, right? Because what really happens is we are so embedded in the details. We're so into the details of whatever we do, whether we're teachers, engineers, artists, musicians, whatever, environmental specialists, that we assume that everyone knows everything about what we do, and we just have to deliver.
Or even if we don't assume, we just don't think about it.
We don't think about it.
It's not even, right? Because we'll stop and be like, wait, were you assuming? Oh, no, of course they would. It's almost like they didn't think about it. But what's different? I get what you're saying, but what's different about what you're doing and somebody coaching somebody on like giving a presentation? Like, what's the story part? Like, how do you
that comes next. So first we do like a basic, that would be like a basic presentation, a non-story presentation. That would be a delivery, that'd be delivery of information presentation. But there, I already get them when they do a basic delivery of presentation, like they have to explain a product, right? So this is a supermarket app that scans the QR code, and it has the following features. You can download it on your iPhone. It's got this. You can take pictures. You can, get updates of the latest whatever discounts. And I'll give you a 7-day trial. Let me know if you have any questions, right? That would be like a quick message. But when we're doing the basic non-story message, I already train them on how to use the more conversational story-like lingo. Like, don't give me a long presentation, a long sentence, a long, sentence full of words and adjectives and adverbs. Forget no adverbs. Eliminate all the adverbs. All right. No adverbs.
Okay, cool.
Right. Yeah. Adverbs.
Can you give us an example? Like, can you kind of imagine doing this and like telling me about something? Like when
I can give you an example of like a job interview. I have an example here from a
Great.
guy, and I can read it and I can see like the before and after picture, right? So
Okay.
he was explaining a typical interview question where he was asked, what is something that you did, something that you believe is a success story in your past work. And so he was saying something like this. The original was something like this. I was working as a software developer. I had recently been hired by this company, blah, blah, blah company. During code review, I observed an anomaly in the code created by other members of the team. The script did not alter the performance. However, it generated an additional gigabyte of unnecessary storage. He was basically doing sentence, 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 sentence. It
Sorry,
wasn't
what?
wrong.
Wait, what? I fell asleep for a moment.
Right, exactly. You need some coffee now? I'll give you some. Right. So I this is the kind of thing that we want to be able to like change. So to change that, we need to say the story lingo of that, which would look something more like this. So there I was, finally working as a software engineer, new guy, first day on the job, feeling a little nervous. First assignment, code review. Oof. At first, everything looked pretty good until I found something odd, a script totally out of place. Okay, and it goes on and on and on.
I love
like
it.
this.
And maybe with some pauses to like, so it's not too scripted, right? Like,
It doesn't sound too scripted. So
right,
as you can see,
but it's beautiful.
It's
I mean,
different.
that's what
It's different.
That's what I
That's
want.
story lingo.
I love it. I mean, that is what, as an academic director at a few different universities, like that's what, when I'm interviewing teachers, what I want to hear when I say, tell me about your teaching experience. Tell me about, something like you were talking about this product, tell me about something you were really proud of, some moment, something that happened. 9 times out of 10, you're not hearing what you just did. You're hearing this kind of more, I did this, I got that, not, well, it wasn't easy, but I tried. And then what happened next? I thought of, right, this kind of stuff. It's
Yeah,
really
more like a
good.
story. Yeah, more exciting.
It's great.
So there's a point. We do this a lot. Of course, this is like the personalized coaching, but there are examples. I mean, if you look at the script for a TED Talk, it looks a lot like this. Any cool TED Talk where the speaker is telling about something that happened to them. They generally have these short pauses and sentences. There I was, new guy.
Right.
First day on the job, right? It was my first day on the job, right? So what we do when we really, this is conversation, but the thing is, conversations are stories. If you
and then what it's like, you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and then that person is able to go out and like meet someone at a party, and they can use the same thing because it's not this dry, resume, CV type cover letter.
No, of course.
Discourse. It's natural. It's conversational. Everybody likes stories in any context, right?
So yes, and it's engaging. You connect with the audience. So what makes stories different is obviously the structure of the words is different. We don't have only complete sentences. We have some complete sentences. Okay, but we have a lot of fragments. We have a lot of engaging words like there I was, dot, dot, dot. That's, okay, that's not giving you a lot of information, but it generates some suspense. Oh my God, and what happened next, right? That's what you want to know. And what's also important is that you repeat stuff. So, when the guy says, I found something odd, a script totally out of place, right? Something odd and something totally out of place. If you're in your 5th grade writing class, your teacher will say, no, that's redundant. Only write one sentence.
Redundant, yeah.
Redundant. Cross off. So we're taught that repetition is bad. Well, guys, repetition is good. We need repetition. We need repetition, and we need to hear things in different ways. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. I was like, oh my God.
Right.
I just said the same thing 3 different ways. Right. But in a story, I was surprised. Stop, and I go to the next sentence. It's not the same.
No, what really strikes me, and earlier I told you that when I'm helping my students prepare for a conversation, something where the focus is more fluency, not something prepared that they're reading, not scripted, that they first do something very scripted, right? And that's a way, like we said, to catch, as teachers, we can catch, some errors in grammar. word stress and pronunciation, like, different things to help them so that when they're doing, like an actor, right? You got your lines, you've got your,
That's what it is.
and it would be crazy, right, to suggest that someone who does a TED talk doesn't do any preparation, right? It's like
They do a lot.
So much preparation. So what I'm thinking as you're telling me this is and I've done this, but not as you've inspired me here I think to do this even more like formally, is it is useful to have something that is in writing explaining what you've done with the with the adverbs, with all that stuff,
with the whole thing, the whole package.
If you do that first, because it's not like we're say you have to make a choice here, right? We're saying that there's a place for both, right? So maybe you have to submit a report about what you've done, right? This product, maybe that needs to be something in writing, but definitely you could take that, right? And from there, right, use it as fodder, right? Use it as a way to, like, with the story lingo, right? How could you take that and then make that something you do in an interview, in a conversation at a bar about someone says, what do you do? And it's a story or a TED talk. Do you agree with that?
Right.
Or do you think it doesn't work that way?
Well, you have to see what works as a story and what doesn't. So some things are going to work as story and some things won't. Right. And some people are so good that they can make just about anything work as a story. But for something to be a story, there are like some basic ingredients that you need. Because a story is like a description.
I'm sure people watching this are thinking like, okay, story, Paul, break it down. Like, give us
what makes a story.
Yeah.
All right.
Give us the basics.
Here's what you need. Like if I'm just, delivering the metrics for this quarter and just, it went up 5% on this and this 7%. You don't really have to tell a story there. You can perhaps the valuable part, if you're an analyst, maybe the valuable part is deliver the metrics, tell them what happened, 5%, 10%. But then when you do your analysis, which is what your salary is really about, you get paid to give your opinion and your insight into what you believe, why this happened, or what should we do next. That's where you story tell it, right? That's where you story tell it. So let me give you a breakdown of what a story is, and then when you can use it, right? So a story has to have change. It's a description of change. Something changed. If there's no change, there's no story. The only, a lot of people say, well, what about comedies? And comedies at the end of the 30-minute episode in a sitcom, it's all the same. Well, that's the crazy thing about comedy. It's where you think that something ought to change, and then the person just goes back to being their usual self. So it's an almost change, but then back again. It's a circular story, right? It's a no change, no change story, but it is a story. Okay, so it has to be a description of change. It has to be a situation where order is disrupted in some way. Something, was in what way? There was an order, and then something kaboom, just like changed completely. It doesn't mean that you traveled in time or to the past, like Back to the Future, or you became a toy like Toy Story. It doesn't have to be so incredibly different, but for business, it could be just simply a challenging experience. All people that work in a company, it doesn't matter.
It's sort of new and surprising information to capture and keep the attention of the listener.
Right. It's just something new. We had a problem. We had a bug in our code, or we lost our main customer, or there was a fire because we didn't follow in the plant because we didn't follow some procedures, or we did, but we discovered that there's something else. There's this flammable thing, and the engineers are trying to figure out what it is. So the thing is that you have to have a purpose for a business story, whereas the purpose for a literature or movies is primarily entertainment, although of course authors, they all have a view on life, and they also want to transmit that, obviously. In business, you are essentially communicating a message. In an interview, it's you're the brand, and you're selling your brand, bro. I mean, that's what this is all about. If somebody in an interview doesn't know that they're the brand and they're selling it, that's the first thing they need to know. They're not just regurgitating their CV, which is what most people do in an interview. Yeah, you are selling your brand.
Like they're representing their CV. That's like the worst thing.
Yeah, right. They are the brand manager.
You are
You're like, you're trying to sell, a player to one of the football clubs. So you got to tell how good this guy is, or whatever this gal is, and you got to sell that person, right? Why they're going to, score all the goals and win the World Cup or whatever, right? That's what you have to do. Now, you have to do it in a way that's not an exaggeration. So you have to figure out where are your victories. But also, because people want real people, you also have to be honest and own up to whatever, your defeats or flaws or whatever, when they ask the famous question, what is your greatest weakness? You have to, and you could tell a story in that, in both what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness. Those are questions to be answered with a story.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Let me jump in here.
Yeah.
I want you to keep talking about what a story is, but I just want to make sure, is there a place either on your website or other places where people could see some samples like, okay, here are some traditional questions that are asked at interviews, like what is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? Here's a way to do it with a story. Like, do you have something like that? Do you recommend?
I don't have it yet. I'm working on making some of that stuff accessible. So I appreciate that you asked that, because it's something that I haven't, shared with the world yet. I have tons of examples. To make it exciting, you need to include the most important element of story, which is conflict, right? So, I remember I went to a company once. I, kind of started using this story lingo once after working with Gustavo and developing all this stuff. And I told them that I was going to have a storytelling workshop and how we can, learn from our experience. And this one manager said, okay, but we don't want to talk about anything bad, right? Because I'm like, no, we want to talk about bad things. We want to talk about how we screwed up and how we learn from that. Oh, but do you really think we should do that? Yes, that's what storytelling is. If we don't do that, if we're always great, then there's no story. And you know what? Nobody cares. And in 2021, nobody believes you. So that's also a thing. So storytelling is also kind of a way of just being a little bit more authentic, saying, look, you're not going to believe what happened to me. I was doing this, I was doing that. So there has to be conflict. You have to include in there a situation where things are not going your way, where it's just bad. No, it's just bad. In whatever it was, sales, technology, whatever it is.
And that's one of those questions in interviews, like about problems, about solutions. But if you already have a story ready, then it's not some just, boring pat answer of, I had this problem, this is my solution. It's in the form, right, of a genuine.
It's in the form of story. Yeah. But a lot of the problem solution, this dynamic of problem solution is basically a story. I mean, you could tell it as a story, or you could tell in a boring way. Okay, if you have, like the infomercials are really bad because they don't tell a story. They're like, hey, are you tired of doing this? Well, we have this new product. It's not a story. That's why they're so awful. Right. But a lot of the more, high-end commercials, that have well-paid talent, and have really nice production value,
and then the TED Talks and the TED Talks are so based on that, so it's not just like reading about how to do this, right? It's just finding.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, you could also find them if you like podcasts, if you listen to it, you follow anybody on a podcast, you could go to the NPR website /npr.org/podcast, I think, or just Google it and get the right link for that. You have podcasts about any subject you like, technology, business, human rights, whatever you like. And you listen to a podcast about that topic. And usually it's 2 or 3 people. I am the big fan of neuroscience. So I listen to a podcast called The Hidden Brain. Really great. But accessible to people who are not neuroscientists, just normal Joes like me.
And you're going to hear some of that story lingo.
Conversations. Yeah. You hear the story lingo because it's the host interviewing 2 or 3 different persons about a subject, and they have a conversation. And whoever the host interviews, that person will tell a story, and then the host will be kind of tempted to tell his little story about that subject. So podcasts are usually nice moments to hear people tell their stories. They usually stay on topic, so it's the same topic the entire hour or 30 minutes. And as Stephen Krashen says, this really great linguist and academic hero that I have, and I think a lot of teachers have. We have to listen many times to input. We have to repeat. So if you listen to something, listen to it a lot. Don't just listen to it one time and say, okay, I got it. Yeah, check. I understood. No. Learners and the non-native English speakers, you need to immerse yourself. You need to listen to something a whole bunch to the point where you already know like the first 2 minutes of that talk. You already know that he's going to make the joke about the cat, and then he's going to cough. Right. That's how many times you should listen to it.
And so the key there, and this is what I talk about all the time, because I'm all about relax, repeat, remember, all about meaningful repetition, is you have to really want to repeat that. Not because a teacher told you to, not because I told you to, Story Paul told you to. This is something to repeat. You've got to really get hooked onto something. Right. And that's, I feel, our job as teachers more than anything, right? Is to help people get hooked onto something out there. Because if they get hooked onto it, right, then they're going to repeat it. Then they're
going to repeat it. Exactly.
But if they don't, and it feels like some kind of burden or some kind of forced assignment, it's just never going to happen.
No, you're not going to want it. With podcasts, I'm not saying they should repeat the podcast. They could take like a little fragment of it and do some shadowing.
Right.
I know in your exercises, because you work with music and rhyme, the students repeat it because it's fun. With a podcast, when I mean repeat, it's like listen to it repeatedly, like many times, and then you can take a fragment and do a little bit of shadowing. Just do like 60 seconds of the shadowing of that, speaker that you really like, and find someone that you like how they their pace. Yeah. Find somebody. If it's Oprah, it doesn't matter who it is, just find somebody that you like.
I totally agree. Because we don't have a lot of time, I really want to get into something I feel is so important. For a few reasons. One is because of some of the people who are going to be watching this who are saying, Story Paul, that's really cool. And maybe what you're saying could even help me in my next job interview. But I don't teach adults. I don't teach business English. I've got classrooms. I've got young learners. What could happen so that those kids earlier than usual develop some of the storytelling techniques that could help them down the road?
I think storytelling in the ESL classroom, when you're dealing with kids, is really important. That teachers need to bring storytelling not only for kids to hear a story, but the kids to learn how to tell a story, to learn about how to organize the story, the conflict, the first act, the second act, the third act. I've done a few workshops for teachers of young learners, and a big shout out to my good friend and colleague Andrea Polera. Andrea, hey, with whom I've done some of these workshops on these topics, and I think she's here. So big shout out to her. And basically in these workshops, and here's the main message, is that today, storytelling, and there she is, today, creativity is one of the 4 skills that kids need. The 4 skills: creativity, communication, critical thinking, and these skills are so important for kids. So it's not just reading and writing. So by creating class projects, where children tell a story, whether maybe they create a fun adventure story, a story, about something imaginary like a monster or a hero or whatever it might be, or they just retell a story, or they create a fun story, about a group of chairs speaking to each other. It doesn't matter. Whatever their imagination takes them, there could be an activity that might be related to maybe a grammar point. So the idea is a couple of things. First of all, storytelling for kids stimulates their creativity, which we want to develop. We don't just want children to only learn a structure, to learn a syntax, because that's terrible. If we only do that, then we have failed miserably. So we can ask them to write a story about maybe something they're seeing in class right now, or using some of the, hey, we learned these words, let's create a story with these words. And they'll create the weirdest story in the world, right? So
sorry to jump in, but what about, because you talked about the importance of models, right? Like, what about models? Right. Like, what if I'm a teacher and I'm like, yeah, I might be able to model a little bit, but Story Paul is talking about, and Jason talking about, like, getting inspired and hooked. Like, are there storytellers or types of videos or books or magazines or things that teachers could show kids, that kids could look at, and then they just want to repeat? And when they repeat and they get that, then they're able to tell their story by modeling a bit from someone else.
Let's see. I don't know if there are. There's something called digital storytelling. If you drop digital storytelling into YouTube, you're going to find a lot of school projects, especially from from maybe, I don't know, primary or elementary school, but also secondary school, where kids, what they do is they use digital medium, whether it's with a PowerPoint or they create a video where they tell a story. And many times it could be very broad. It could just be the story of Mahatma Gandhi. So it's just basically just kind of, they might just go into Wikipedia and kind of read some of the stuff.
Or
that
it
they
could be
learned
or a more personal story too.
Or it could be a more personal story. Something this summer, or a dream I had, or,
Right.
a fun story with some imaginary characters. And the idea is that it's not only about telling the story. So there's a lot of models in there. Drop the word digital storytelling into YouTube and you're going to find infinite models. Okay. There's also a website called Edutopia. So edutopia.com has a lot of resources on storytelling for K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade. They have tons of resources on it, especially. And then I'm going to do kind of a bit of a promotional thing here, but here,
please.
Here in Argentina, we have a great maker of storytelling toys, and I'm going to show you some of them right here. They're called Sisigi Resources, and I'm working on a project with them right now.
Great.
They're these story dice, okay? And we're trying to figure out a way for this to be shipped out to the world. Unfortunately, let me see if I can. Here they are.
Cool. I see mermaid.
Mermaid. There we go.
Yeah. Cool.
Right. So you roll the dice. One of them has like characters. Another one has like places, igloo. Another one has, like questions, like who, what. So you have these resources, right? Watch clock, right? I don't know if you can see it here. It's kind of out of focus. There we go.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have numbers. You got emotions, happy face, sad face, all that stuff, and you kind of roll the dice. And you create a story. I mean, basically, these are story prompts, okay? Yeah. And they are really, really cool. Very right? Cool. Mermaid and cowboy there. So, you can't think of an idea, roll the dice. So these are the story dice set from Sisigi Resources, which is from Argentina. And, we're working on ways to be able to ship this out to the whole world.
Can you put that in the chat? And while you're while you're putting that in the chat, let me just say, I can imagine being a teacher watching this and thinking, I want to know more. I want to know not just Edutopia or NPR. Like, I want to know, for example, where can I see Story Paul talking to primary school teachers about story? Like, where would you recommend people go to hear you talk more about what you do? Whether it's with business students, whether it's with young learners, teachers. Is there one place? Is there one website? Would you recommend Facebook? Wherever you would recommend, could you tell us?
I haven't really posted a lot of that. I've had conversations with teachers here around Argentina and the nearby countries, Uruguay, Colombia, not so near, but part of South America. And basically just, I've had some webinars and working with Andrea that I just shouted out to Andrea Polera.
Right.
We've had lots of webinars with teachers from all over the region. I haven't really put on an actual resource, basically because it's been lack of time.
No, I totally understand, but I have the same problem. Sometimes people are like, where can I see your stuff? And my answer is kind of like all over the place. So
you can go to storypaul.com.
Can you
go to my
Put that in the chat.
Put that in the chat. Can go to my
email address. So if somebody can, if you don't mind, if somebody can email you.
No. And then my email is Paul English teacher. It's not very Paul English teacher at gmail.com.
Okay.
Right. And you can look at if you go to my website, you have like kind of a connection to all the different my YouTube and LinkedIn and all that stuff.
And can people contact you directly through your website?
People can contact me.
Okay, so let me just share. I'm just going to share my screen for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Before we go.
And I've made a few videos, that were fun that I teachers can share. I've made a few videos that are very kid friendly, fun and silly and really cool.
Cool. I just want people who are watching this, not just live, but people who are going to watch this later. To be able to find out more, whether it's emailing you directly or going to a site. So I'm just going to get your website up here. But while I do, what are you working on now? Anything in particular? Something that you want to do more in the future? Can you just tell us sort of what you're
Yeah, right now I'm working on a project involving the dice, the story dice, with the people from Sicily. That's, you know, we're trying to give it some shape and trying to make that accessible to teachers.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a project involving the business storytelling. And then on my own, I'm writing a book, a novel, but that's just for fun.
Wow, very cool. So here's storypaul.com. And if you don't see what you're looking for, you're saying they could connect with you here in social media.
Right.
And good. Excellent. Yeah. So
yeah, they can go to my social media, connect with me, and that'll be fine.
Okay, great. And you know, I'm glad you're working on a novel, but I can tell you right now, is there a book out there which talks about what you've been talking about today and all your experience with storytelling? Because I feel like, you know, that could be huge, man. So, you know, if you're not working on it now, maybe after your novel.
Or maybe before it.
I don't know, but I just think, you know, I mean, I think we all understand very well that the future is not about, you know, just pat answers and you know, factual information which we can now get on the internet. It's about having this creative skills to tell a story. It's how to engage people, you know,
it's about engagement.
Yeah, and it includes, you know, empathy. All of that is just storytelling seems like a perfect arena for that. So, you know, I hope, you know, if I was going to read a book about it, I'd want to read your book about it. So I hope that's something you'd consider.
I am working on that. It is part of the course that I'm working on.
Okay, cool. So, and you have a course anyway. So if people are interested either in joining a course that you're teaching or recommending it, or if they're teachers and they want to get ideas from you, storypaul.com is the place to go. It doesn't surprise me that people in the business world are you know, coming to you for, you know, because they like this approach. Because there's nothing worse than like a dry interview, a dry presentation, a dry conversation at a restaurant about what you're doing. But this extends to academics, you know, admissions essays, you know, applying to universities. This extends to making friends.
Everything.
you know, storytelling.
Having a life.
It's everything. It's everything. I mean, I'm sure in your world it's everything. You're Story Paul, it's Story Lingo. But, you know, when I think about songs I write, you know, the songs that I like the most and everyone seems to like most, they're stories, you know, they're stories.
Man. Something's going on.
Story Paul, it was really a pleasure to have you as our featured teacher for August 2021. Thanks for all the valuable information you shared, your experience. Storytelling is something I feel we're going to hear more and more about. You're going to be one of those people like, you were there first, you know, the protege. But and it's, you know, great to see you again. And I hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you. Really appreciate all the kind words and everything, and all the support all these years. Really appreciate that, Jace.
Yeah, right back at you, man.
Very kind.
Right back at you. So, signing off here from Paris, France, and from
Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires. Yeah, Buenos Aires. Yeah, we are worldwide, and we have teachers here from all over the world. That's right.
Yeah.
This is Jason Levine, also known as Fluent CMC, American TESOL Institute. Thank you so much for making these featured teachers webinars possible. We'll see you next time for another one in September. Story Paul, thanks again, my man. Salute, everybody.
Hey, man.
Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, English language teachers worldwide. Bye-bye. See ya.
See ya. Bye.